Hey, it's Chris. Let's talk Kickstarter campaigns. Let's talk my top Kickstarter campaigns from the month of January. Now, this is going to be a little nebulous. I may even change the definition up as this sort of ongoing series goes on about whether it was a game that launched in that month versus a game that ended in that month. Maybe both. Maybe I'll throw it in both months if it crosses that bridge and spans it. But if it does, obviously it's worth talking about, and maybe even worth talking about twice, depending on the game. Maybe even I'll throw in surprises, some excitements, some disappointments, and just kind of give my thoughts now that we've had a little bit of time to reflect on it as well, how I feel about it now versus how you felt in the hype of the campaign, because we all know when the campaign's going on, when those stretch goals are being smashed, when updates are pouring out, when there's money burning a hole in your pocket, that you feel differently than, okay, now that let me take a step back, let me look at this a little more objectively. Now, how do I feel about it? Do I have any pleasure's remorse? Do I have any regrets on not backing things? And where do I fall in the middle? So let's take a look at the month of January, and I'll give you my thoughts on things now, kind of where they stand. Look, if you didn't think that this one was going to be the first one I talked about, you don't know me very well at this point. But good thing is, you can get to know me. So yes, I went with the all-in on Primal. It launched in January, and that's why I'm including it in this month's list and this month's roundup. Say what you want. I think, as I've said before, I wish it was standees. I think the miniatures are superfluous, especially so in this game, especially how little they're doing and the fact that they are just rotating and not even moving. You can't even, like, move them around the board. So we'll see how that compares to Monster Hunter. That's a whole different conversation. But there was a lot of information out about this game. There were a lot of videos from people that I respect that played it. And, you know, Board Game Co. said that this is a great game. And you just even see, like, the comments even trickling out now, nearly 2 months after the campaign started, about people saying, hey, look, I just played this online on the online system, a Tabletop Simulator, whichever one it is. And I'm really liking it. This is really surprising me in terms of the depth, in terms of the tactical nature, in terms of some of the strategy, in terms of planning ahead on the turns and the combos with the cards. I don't think the fun factor can be understated in a game like this. And that's ultimately what won me over. To be very honest with you guys, like the first week after this finished funding, I had buyer's regret. I won't kid you. I had buyer's regret. I said, oh man, you know, what did I do? Why did I spend this much money on something that's going to be super hard to hit to the table? It's going to be massive boxes that you don't have storage space anyway. And I said, you know what? This is so unique. This is so different. Kids love dragons. By the time I get this, my older one is definitely going to be able to play this. And because we're not getting into March 2022. Don't kid yourself. Like March 2023, my kid's going to be almost 10. It'll be a hit from that side of things. The more I thought about it and the farther I have gotten out from the actual campaign, the better I feel about this. Now, say what you will about the campaign as well, miniatures aside for a minute. I give them a lot of credit. A lot of credit, because I have not seen this in hardly any other campaign. Like maybe Townsfolk Tussle is really the only other one. And I think I said it there, and I'm going to say it here again in a different way. Like, Reggie Games, you get mad props from me on this, because you just said, hey guys, here's our price, boom, nothing else. You're going to get some stretch goals, but we're not throwing in other add-ons. We're not throwing in a whole bunch of other stuff that's going to sort of trickle out throughout the campaign. You either like the price, you don't like the price, you're in, you're out. Now, yes, the core pledge is probably more than a lot of people would have liked for a barrier to entry. And so that's where Monster Hunter is going to be different, and with a lower barrier to entry. And even with the CMON games, a lower barrier to entry. But as an all-in, when you compare it to things that are out there recently, Darkest Dungeon, the latest Zombicide, any of that stuff, the all-in is relatively comparable or even slightly less. Only they just set it on day one instead of day, next to last. And so I appreciate that level of transparency. You may not like the price point, but you have to admit that level of transparency is refreshing. You don't have to think about how many times am I going to be nickeled and dimed for something that I may or may not want, something that may be marked Kickstarter exclusive or limited print run, or may show up at retail or not during the campaign. And that is refreshing. And so that is also why I think it needs to be talked about. Even if I wasn't backing this, even if I didn't like this, even if you didn't like this concept whatsoever and this is not your type of game, that is why you need to be talking about this, because even some of the smaller campaigns that run in the low 5 figures or even low 6 figures, they have adopted the other style of things where, you know, the Awaken Realm style of things, the CMON style of things, the just a lot of all of these big publishers that just trickle stuff out in order to keep the hype going and keep the build going and just all of that. And yes, it works. I mean, it's a marketing thing. It works, but this worked too. 2 million euros. I hope that we see more of this. I hope that we see more of the townsfolk tussle where they say, you know what, guys, this is what you're going to get. Boom. There you go. Yes, stretch goals plus or minus. Townsfolk tussle did that too, but they said, you know what, we're not throwing in 6 expansions with this. We're going to stay within what we can do and what the time frame is that we want to be able to deliver this in. And so there you go. That is why it's worth talking about. That's why ultimately I'm very happy with this. Second up is Darwin's Journey. Now, speaking of things that may not be appealing to everybody, like, look, I understand that Primal's not going to be appealing to everyone. I also understand that Darwin's Journey is not appealing to everyone. It's not appealing to me. But in the context of things, take a step back a second and go, this is a Euro game that just raised over 1 million euros. It's a weird sentence. And so that is not common. That is not routine. Like, you don't see non-miniature heavy based, you know, Ameritrash games very often raising that type of money, especially the worker placement heavy Euro style games, maybe like Lacerda or the On Mars sort of thing, but not many of these other games come anywhere near that. And so the fact that this was able to do that with only a 70 euro pledge, that's insane. That's actually relatively insane in how much that raised at that pledge level. Like, at least with Primal, you can say people were putting, like me, like nearly 300 bucks in. This is 70 euros. So that's a drastic difference. And I'm not sure if it was the hype, the first real big Kickstarter of 2021, the lull that sort of came from sort of the end of November, mostly through December and into January, and people had money burning a hole in their pocket again, or people really believe that this one is going to be that good and really like the excitement of this one compared to other ones we have seen in the last 6 months to a year, or even the first 3 months of this year so far, because it's dwarfing mostly everything else that I can think of in that regard in terms of similar games and raising money and crowdfunding. Like I've said, I am not the correct person to look at this and go, oh, well, clearly this is, you know, different in the Euro sense of this and that. And no, I can't do that. Give me Primal, give me some of that other stuff, and I'll give you the breakdown. This is outside my wheelhouse. And so all I can do is go, look, this is a lot heavier. I read through a couple of the other competitors' rule books that have come out so far this year, and I know that this is heavier. I know that this is more of a overall complex game. But I just didn't realize that the demand for something like this with a very well integrated theme and a good amount of hype, but a whole lot of traction, it seems like, behind it too in the gameplay, is actually that in demand. Because my feeling had always been sort of on Euros as a non-Euro person, like, there's so many solid, stand up to the test of time Euro games on the market at retail that seem to be patterned after but never quite duplicated as well, that a lot of the Euros that come out on Kickstarter are just not, I don't want to say deeply panned by people, but just they don't seem to have necessarily the traction. Now there's a few and far between that do. You know, you take your On Mars, you take your Anachrony, you take those, but how many other Euro games that you can't name have come up as well? So this is having the makings of having the same ring or being in the same air as those other two that I just mentioned. But only when people start to get it and it gets the broad base collective consciousness thought and review will we see, does it actually hold up as those have held up on both sides of the market. And with a lot of the Euros, you don't always see as many stretch goals. I mean, they threw in a ton of stretch goals. You saw at the top there, 46 stretch goals. I mean, you just scrolling, it's like a CMON scrolling for the unlocks. Now, as with all good Euros, they have the deluxeifications, they have the sleeves, they have the metal coins. And so, yes, if you want that copy of this game, I mean, that is the one thing you can say true of the Euros, is that those deluxe versions, when the game is even halfway good, like not like top shelf Euro, but it's like 75% top shelf Euro, the value holds up for the deluxe versions. So It's a relatively safe bet from a money standpoint as well, although you're looking at well over probably $100 for a euro here once you include shipping. So that's more of the question. Is $100 for a euro as justifiable as $300 for an Amerithrash? And as much as I hate to admit it, the answer is probably yeah. Absolutely. Now, the third one up, this is going to be a little more controversial. Now, this is Epic 7 Rise. I talked about this when it was going on. By a new creator, Farside Games. It's taking a property that is known in the video game world. It's porting it to the tabletop. Now, this is a do and a don't. This is sort of a mix of things. Because I think the concept is great. The mechanisms are unique. It's light enough that I feel like you could play it as a very light, easy to get to the table dungeon crawl-esque game. It raised a fair bit of money. Over $500,000, nearly $600,000 US currency, about $571,000. And so that's really good for a first time, but very simplistic rulebook, which I didn't get the feeling that that was a final rulebook, because I felt like there were things missing. And even though we are now about a month out from it funding, I have not seen a rulebook yet, fully. I have also not seen any gameplay videos. And I backed this for $1 because I love the concept. I love the idea of it. It looks beautiful to me. I like the anime style. I'm a big fan of it. Big fan of the level 99 style, big fan of the chibi style, big fan of this style. But the question is the gameplay going to actually hold up? Because we haven't seen it yet. And that is the big downside is, why on earth do you not have a gameplay video? I feel like there's a higher chance of being burned by lack of gameplay video. And that's the thing I want to point out is, how many campaigns do you see that raise that much money actually do not have a gameplay video? So that's going to be the make it or break it for me when this finally comes out, of whether or not I'm going to keep my pledge or not. And I missed some of the, I think the discount or whatever it was, or the free little upgrade thing, because I downgraded my pledge during the campaign and I'd have to upgrade it during the pledge manager. But for $120, I couldn't justify a big risk like that. Like 2-3 years ago, I probably would have kept it and I would have rolled the dice with it. But my other concern is that if this is a miss from a gameplay standpoint, I'm not sure about the resaleability. Like, this could have a negative resaleability, even though the price point is relatively good for the amount of stuff you're getting. For $120 for all the stuff you're getting is good. Let's not kid ourselves. Other positive, they did standees as well as miniatures. So a lot of people clamor for them. And so the fact that this did both and it listened to people, or it just knew that people would want them, was also a positive. But this one has high potential. It also has a lot lower floor than a lot of the other ones that I've seen. Even say something like Bard Song, Darkest Dungeon, they all have a higher floor, even if they're not as good as people hope for. And if this one doesn't quite hold up to the muster, I don't know what you're going to do with it then. And I hope it's a good game. Like I said, I really like the idea of this game. I like how the mechanics were different. I like the incorporation, miniatures, whatever, but I like the art. But, I mean, it's a little bit of a yellow red flag. Like, there was a Man vs. Meeple video for this campaign, I think just over a month before it launched, talking about sort of a preview. And so if you have enough money and time to send it to them to do a preview, why aren't you putting gameplay out? Because I'm also a firm believer that if you stand behind your product, you're letting people see what it actually looks like in that sense. Because a lot of people do that, and it's not like people are like, oh, you exposed it, now we're not going to back it and fund it. No, I mean, it's because they put out a good product and you can see what it actually looks like, and that entices people more because they like what they see, as opposed to people seeing it and not liking it in droves and running away. So that was the big question mark on this campaign, and that's why I bring it up, is because obviously people put their money out there without a gameplay video, and that's a little bit scary nowadays. Not that I'm necessarily concerned about getting a product, but, you know, we talk about Kickstarter not being a pre-order. You saw my video on Shadow Tactics and Onimaru, which were highly funded each. So stuff happens too. I don't expect that at all with this. I'm not saying that this is going to be anything like that. But it just makes me go, why didn't we see that? And we should have. Next up, and, you know, again, because I don't think you can talk about successful campaigns without talking about this one. Bezier Games, Castles of Mad King Ludwig Collector's Edition. Say what you want about whether or not the game's for you. A lot of people like this game. It was a staple at retail that a lot of people really enjoyed, with the expansions that they're out there as well. And now they gave you more of a good thing, remastered, artwork redone, and a whole bunch of more goodness from the expansions, the modularity. Very, very, very akin to the Kickstarter they did before for Suburbia in the collector's edition sense. It's just very much reminiscent of that. I think they said that was a good formula. Copy, paste Castles of Mad King Ludwig. And when it's not broke, don't try and fix it. And you can see, I mean, it raised $1.5 million. And I wonder, and the reason I'm going to mention this one as well, is because now that we've seen retail games converted into Kickstarter games, we've seen Suburbia, retail, couple expansions, collector's edition, huge expansions, huge everything going along with it. Castles of Mad King Ludwig, expansion, all of a sudden, collector's edition Kickstarter. Are we going to see that trend from more Bezier games? Or, more importantly, are other companies going to look at that and go, hey, we could do that too? I mean, neither of these games is old. I mean, I mentioned that this raised $1.5 million. Suburbia raised 1.8. And Suburbia was a 2012 game, and they did this in 2019. Castles was a 2014 game, and they did this in 2021. So a 7-year gap each time. 7 years? Like, are those dog years now? Are board game years dog years? Like, 7 years might as well be a half century. Like, 7 years is not a lot of time between, remastering essentially the whole game and putting out a whole bunch more stuff, including a lot of it being deluxifications. I mean, we've seen CMON do it in a sense with Blood Rage, right? Oh, that was Kickstarter to Kickstarter, but they sort of did something similar. Are we going to start to see it with other retail games? And the answer is, I'm a little hopeful and I'm a little bit trepidatious. Like, I don't really want to see that because it plays on the consumerism a little bit too much. It plays on the bloat a little bit too much for me. And I think it also plays a little bit too much on the remastered reeditions of games that really don't need a reedition, a 2.0 version, if you will. The big example that I've seen is, the Tiny Epic games. How many Tiny Epic versions of like Kingdoms were there or are there, or even Galaxies now? I think they like redid the artwork completely on Galaxies. And so there's like 4 versions of it or something, making that up, but you know what I'm saying. And not even within like half a decade, like how many versions? And that's the concerning thing, because you know that there are people out there that feel like they have to have the new edition, and sometimes they have to have the old editions too, from a collector's standpoint. So it's playing more on the fears of the FOMO of collectors, not just the game players. And you're seeing it right now with Robinson Crusoe. I mean, Robinson Crusoe is going on right now. They're going to be launching that game in like the next month, the 2.0 version essentially, from a 2012 game as well. So less than a decade later. Is the game that out of date? Does it not hold up that much that you feel like you need to remaster it? Is it a purely driven on this side of things? Like I don't know. I mean, can you imagine if they were like, you know what? Let's remake Tigris and Euphrates and put it on Kickstarter. Or, the big thing facetiously, as has been recently announced, the 20th anniversary edition of Carcassonne, or the new big box version of Russian Railroads. Like, can you imagine those? I mean, those aren't on Kickstarter. Those games are considerably... Russian Railroads, the big box version, I mean, that game's only 2013. They're putting out a new edition. Now, that one's kind of out of print. That's a little bit different of an exception. But like the 20th anniversary of Carcassonne, can you imagine if they put that on Kickstarter? How would people feel about that? Last up is CMON's Animation Collection. Again, because I think the point that comes from all of this is more important than maybe actually the campaign itself. I mean, it raised almost $750,000, which, if you're going by other CMON standards, is not as much. But if you look at the premise of this campaign, it is more significant. One, because you're seeing some of the pre-painted miniatures, which they've never done before. Two, it was a very limited campaign a la the comic book Kickstarters that used those as other exclusives for several of their other games like Zombicide and Cthulhu Death May Die. More importantly, though, is how is this going to affect the retail side of CMON? Because that's been one of their biggest criticisms in the past, is they're putting out these products on Kickstarter and the retail is not living up to necessarily the hype. And now that is all speculative, because we know that certain games of theirs, like their flagships Blood Rage and Zombicide, are clearly doing well at retail. But how much of their other product line actually is? They've got more of the CMON Limited as well. And so is this going to be a bridging point for them? Sort of like Awakened Realms has the Awakened Realms Light. The other interesting thing you'll see here is it was not as miniature heavy. And the other interesting note here is that with the last couple, now you're starting to see them reaching out to content providers, creators, whatever you want to call them. So Does that mean the CMON model is changing? Does that mean that they're listening more to people, or are they trying out new tactics to see what people respond to the best? I don't know. But it appears that they're branching out, and they're branching out into IPs that are known. So again, is that also in response to other companies like Steamforge, which seem to be getting a lot of the other well-known IPs? Are they trying to get into that market? Time will tell there, and we'll kind of see. Now, the one thing, CMON, I do miss that you were doing before is you were announcing what the next campaign was going to be at the end of the previous one. So if you're watching this by any chance, I would love to see that feature pop back up. Like you're actually going to watch this. So that's I think more of the take home point. Is this going to be more of a branching into the retail, and are you going to start to see CMON focus on that side of things a little more on their Kickstarters? Less gameplay exclusive, maybe more deluxeification exclusive with, say, like the pre-painted miniatures. So that's it for my not necessarily top Kickstarters of the month, but Kickstarters that are notable for reasons like I mentioned, that raise very interesting points, dilemmas, conversation pieces going forward because of just how they're structured, and maybe what we'll see because of these influences, not only later this year, but years going forward. There you go. That is my thoughts looking back now on the Kickstarters highlighting January. As always, thank you very much for subscribing. Thank you very much for watching this in the first place. You guys have blown me away so far in the first part of 2021. So we are well over halfway to the 2021 and 2021. So maybe I should change that. maybe we should come up with a new number. So if you've got a new number in mind, let me know. I don't have anything. So I'd love to hear what you think. Okay. Like I said, thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you around. Stay classy out there.